Hello there, very good evening and welcome to another edition of the People's Platform. We've been discussing about the economic situation in the country on many episodes here on the People's Platform. Today we are diving a little bit deep into one specific industry here in Sri Lanka. Agriculture is known as the backbone of Sri Lankan economy, but there are other industries as well that contribute to Sri Lanka's economy as much as agriculture, especially at a time when we're facing a forex crisis. Export industries. Now, when we speak of export industries, we cannot forget the apparel industry. Recently, there were some very disturbing reports about the apparel industry, specifically on orders being diverted to other countries during the economic crisis last year, and also very recently, the assault of one of the chairmen of a leading apparel firm here in Sri Lanka, but based in Oman, and the political issues surrounding that, and also the enforcement of law issue that surrounded that. To discuss all of these matters and more, we've got with us here today the Deputy Chairman of the Joint Apparel Association Forum, Mr. Felix Fernando. A very good evening, Mr. Felix Fernando, and welcome to the show. Mr. Fernando, for starters, now there is a very grim picture being painted about Sri Lanka's economy and in translation, the apparel sector as well. I think this didn't begin anytime recently. It was the situation since last year where they were saying that orders are being diverted, factories are being closed down, there is very little work available or orders available for the apparel industry here in Sri Lanka, and that the income generated by the apparel sector or the foreign revenue generated by the apparel sector here in Sri Lanka is reducing. So how bad is the situation?
Currently, if you are looking at for the first 4 months of the year, we have seen a drop of about 17%. 17%? 17% okay. Compared to the last year, first 4 months, the revenue. And the next few months are also not going to be easy. But the reason is that we have observed this situation is going to happen since middle of last year. 2022, for example, is one of the highest and one of the best years for us in the apparel industry.
2022?
2022. Because
surprising.
we have recorded the highest revenue in the history of year.
So in the midst of power outages, fuel shortages, struggle of the people, president being ousted, protests day and night, in the midst of all of this, you managed to have one of your best years last year?
Yeah, almost 5.6 billion. We reached $5.6 billion for the last year because we had a lot of orders, and also we had almost all our capacities were utilized. For example, prior to COVID, we had 2019, we have been keep on growing. We have been kept on growing. But then came 2020, we had a drop. So 21, we have picked up a little bit, and 2022 was much better. But what we have seen globally were not the best. There were two situations. In the USA, basically recession and the economic downturn in US, plus in Europe. That was led by the Russian-Ukraine war. And that what happened to demand. So they had a lot of issues in the sense consumer, because you need to understand that the apparel or the garments are not, it is not an essential, unlike food or unlike medicine, fuel. Especially in Europe, they had to incur a lot of expenses with regard to heating. Because when the winter comes, they need to use a lot of fuel. So that cost was quite high. And so that they'll have to cut their expenses from some other parts. So that the apparel was one of those. Okay, it's maybe instead of buying 12 pairs or 12 garments per year, maybe they probably reduce it to 6, 7, 8. So this is where we have seen first 4 months of this year has shown a drop of about 6% from Europe. That is, Europe's imports from all other parts of the world apparel imports have declined by about 6%. And when it comes to USA, it's worse. It has dropped by about 22%.
Right.
US has accounted for 22% of drop. And when you look at almost all the leading exporters in the world, only Bangladesh has not got much affected, because in case of USA, they were able to maintain or very minor reduction. Bangladesh exports to USA. But EU exports, Bangladesh was still able to keep about few percentage, about 4 or 5% increase compared to the previous year. But rest of the countries, almost no growth or a decline. So this is what is happening in the market today.
So the crisis in Sri Lanka, the situation in Sri Lanka, would I be right to say that it has had a minimal effect on the apparel industry?
I wouldn't say a minimum damage, because right now, if you look at it, we are expecting probably 20-25% drop in the revenue this year. So which means, as you may have noticed, that some of the even large companies, they have staggered working days. Like, for example, probably some factories, they work 3 days a week. Although they are paying the full salary for the employees, they work 3 days a week. Or some factories, they are temporarily closed while they are paying the full salaries. SME sector is the most vulnerable sector. They have been badly affected. And what we say is, 60 to 70% of the SME sector, the factories in SME sector, they run with less capacity. Few of the factories, they have temporarily closed because lack of orders. The factories which are continuing to operate, they are also running maybe about 20-25% of less orders or the less capacity. So it's not, I think, earlier we were expecting by June, July, the situation will become improved, better. But the way it goes, we don't know. I mean, at least for the next 6 months, we don't think that, it will improve. We hope, we pray. One of the main reasons is that because of this situation, the stock holding, both the main markets, they have too many stocks. And they don't have any. And also, some years back, and maybe the suppliers, or customers, the brands, when the interest rates were not very high, they were able to also absorb, keeping those stocks in their warehouses. They were also able to continue orders, thinking that, in the next season, they will have more orders, they'll be able to release these goods. But especially in US, now the interest rates also have gone up. Okay, so that's one of the big, disadvantages. They don't want to bear that the interest costs. So they will cut down the orders simply. So they don't look at how the suppliers will survive. I mean, they want to survive first. So that's where they had to cut down the ordering, and this is happening.
So, Mr. Fernando, now you're speaking about the EU market, the US market, but the world is a very large place. Why hasn't Sri Lankan apparel exports, through the many decades that it has been in existence here in Sri Lanka, at least looked at moving to other markets or growing our customer base there?
See, what happens, US, I'm not sure, still the biggest, I think still the largest market in the world, I think, okay. US was our main market. We started, then also we got EU. Probably maybe their prices were good, they were paying well, and also don't forget the fact that we started with the quota system. When in late 80s, once we started even the 200 garment factories by late Premadasa president. So that's all were directed at, utilizing the US quotas. But then early 21st century, I mean 2003, 2002, 2003, I think, they removed the quotas. Okay? So it became free for everyone. And it was very easy for us to, so we were too much depending on the quota, so we also did not have to look for other markets, number one. Then after tsunami, we were also given another gift by the EU. That is the GSP Plus, which means that if we fulfill the material value addition criteria, what they have said, basically if we have the raw materials bought from EU countries or from SAARC countries, including Sri Lanka, then we can have the duty-free access. That's a big impact. So we are more or less in price-wise 9% to 12% compared with the other countries, our other competitors. So we had that advantage. So that's where we were thriving, and also US, there were a lot of buyers, the main, if you look at Victoria's Secret or some buyers, who have helped us to come to another level in the apparel industry, so that we were too much depending. But last few years, we have been requesting, because we also have been watching the world trends, we knew that, US and EU may not continue to be the largest markets in the future to come. China is going to play a bigger role. India growing, the middle income level are really growing. Middle income level groups are really growing. So for that reason, maybe some time back, the governments are talking to get into FTA with China. And that's one of the main obstacles, was that the protectionism rule. Basically, China wanted most of our open trade, It has to be reciprocal, if we ask them to open the market for our goods, then we'll have to also to open markets. But they have given one condition, because to protect the local industry, so Sri Lanka said at least some industries, give us some period. I'm not sure it's 10 years or 15 years time. By that time, remove all the trade barriers. So I think that's a fair deal, because in about 10-15 years time, also if our industries can't compete with the foreign industry, I don't think that the industries need to exist. I think they had to be competitive. So then India also, they have given us for some years back, they have been giving us 8 million pieces as a free quota. But this 8 million, some of the factories, their monthly output is more than 8 million. Some groups, they produce per day more than 8 million pieces. So it's nothing. And also, the funny part is that 8 million, they count like a pair of gloves as 2 pieces. Pair of socks as 2 pieces. So, what is there? I mean, 8 million is nothing. So then it didn't encourage any of the Sri Lankan exporters also to look at Indian market, because we can't compete in the Indian market, because India, they have the duty structure and they have the internal trade blocks as well. Plus, whereas the Bangladesh, India has given Bangladesh duty-free access to unlimited garments. So we can't compete. Maybe the price difference, real price cost difference between garment made in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka is not that huge. We have to understand that, whereas our quality, delivery, all these things are better, but the real price difference could be we may be expensive by 2-3%, more maximum 4%. But when the duty factor comes, if say 12% duty comes, that's no retailer, no customer in India would like to import garments from Sri Lanka. So we have been telling successive governments, please, talk to India, try to obtain or remove the quotas, maybe, or else at least once this crisis came, they have been good enough to give us loans, temporary loans. So at least, temporary arrangement for 1 year, until we get out from this sort of situation, to help us, give us unlimited access, or else at least increase the limit to say $500 million, not 8 billion pieces. Then, of course, we'll have many people, many industries willing to export to India.
So, sans that factor, sans that kind of incentive or preferential treatment by India, there is no other way that the Sri Lankan apparel sector can be enticed to reach out to the Indian market?
I really doubt, because if you have to compete, you need to have a level playing field. When certain sectors or certain competitors are being treated differently, I don't think that maybe it's like in a cricket match. Maybe the team you have a pitch, slow pitch. The other team has to play not in the same pitch. They have another wicket. It's not fair. So I don't think that that will be very, very difficult, because I think managing cost, managing quality, everything we do correctly. Of course, that means that there are there is room for improvement by Sri Lankan industrialists as well, because and also don't forget the fact, how the industry in Bangladesh was grown is because of Sri Lankan middle management. Few years back, the Chittagong, the zone, had over 5,000 Sri Lankans working for. This is not that the machine operator level people. It's like the technicians, mechanics, industrial engineering, and including some senior management. So now Bangladesh also, earlier said Bangladesh, they are not really competitive with us. They can't compete just because their quality is low. They can't do the garments we do. No, we can't say those things now. It's outdated statements. They also have improved a lot, especially after Rana Plaza, that the fire happened a few years back. So after that, the social compliance, that they have been insisting, the buyers have been insisting, and that the quality level as well as the social compliance have grown up, and they are getting. See, Bangladesh has now jumped to over $40 billion per annum. And Vietnam is another country, a good example. I mean, maybe about 30 years back, probably their export revenue was almost like Sri Lanka. Now, on apparel only, they have gone over $140 million. You see, because Vietnam, what happened? Vietnam is the FTAs. Their governments, they were able to, although they were considered as a communist country some time back, they have been very diplomatic. They were able to reach out to many countries. I think they have more than 14 FTAs with several countries. In certain cases, not with a country, with some associations, which means it's a blocks.
A regional association.
Yeah, that means that you'll have access to more than one country. So that's Vietnam. And Bangladesh has the advantage of being a LDC, least developed country status. So which means that many countries are giving them the privilege, except US, they are able to export duty-free. So that's a big advantage. And also certain countries in Africa, now coming up is Africa. Some of these African countries also have the duty-free access to Europe or US, or depending on the country and depending on the pets. So it's not very easy for us to compete. And of course, we have to blame ourselves also. We don't want to blame governments also, because we have been a little bit complacent. We've been getting orders few years back. So we were considering, yes, it's good. And also, there was this thing, we are also unsure about lack of whether we'll be able to get enough labor, enough workers to continue expand our business. Because few years back, it was not that easy to find machine operators, because there is this social image going around saying, garment worker, juki girl, all sort of being very disrespectful towards the apparel workers. So with that reputation, nobody, a lot of people did not want to come to the industry. Okay. They are looking from far. They don't know what's happening in the industry. Any industry, I'm not saying 100% the players are perfect. Like in every cart, you may find a bad apple. So even in the apparel industry, that may happen. So that's where the government, Department of Labor, all the authorities are there.
Even the internal management.
Exactly, yeah. So these don't wash hands and say apparel industry 100% perfect. But because of that, also some of Sri Lankans also, our entrepreneurs also, but got discouraged, to expand. But the most important thing is, unlike Bangladesh and Vietnam, we were not able to get the FDIs, foreign direct investments. We can't improve the growth, Vietnam growth, Sri Lanka growth, and our growth has been negligible, compared to such countries. So if we want to, as economy, if you want to go forward, I think one of the first things we need to do is, we need to make sure the country, the policies are consistent, and we need to make sure that the ease of doing business index is to make it higher. Now we are even, I think, 100, 101, very below, much below than India. I think few years back, we were quite ahead of India. India had done almost all the sort of policy changes, etc., etc. They are moving ahead, but we are still struggling. And we can't, there is no reason for foreign investor to come and invest in Sri Lanka. I'm not talking only in the apparel industry, but in industry.
There's no incentive.
I'm not saying that we have to give tax incentives or anything, but they need to have, like what you said earlier at the beginning of the program. Some of the investors, they come here and they get beaten up by some politicians. Okay, so is that the reward we are giving for investing in Sri Lanka?
Well, of course, we spoke about a lot of external factors that have affected the apparel industry. We will cross over to a short commercial break and on the other side continue this discussion. Don't go anywhere. You're watching The People's Platform.
හරිම විස්තර ගම්මානයක් මොනවත් නැහැ. මොනවත් නැහැ. අලින්ගේ අලි කාරදරේ හරියට හේරත් එකක් හරියට නැහැ ළමයි. වතුර තිබුණාට අපිට මේ බොන වතුර නැහැ. රුපියල් 200 මේ දෙකක් තුනක් දීලා තමයි වතුර ලීටරයක් ගන්න.
Gammelda. For the people, by the people.
මට දැනෙන්නේ IMF එක අන්දලා වගේ.
කිසිම දවසක ඔය ඉලක්කම් ටික එකතුව හරියට එකතු වෙන්නේ නැහැ.
අසාධාරණ වැඩක් නෙමෙයි ඒක.
මේක වෙනසක් වෙයි කියලා බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන අමාරුයි. IMF එක වෙත ගෙනියපු කිසිම සැලැස්මක කිසිම ගණනය කිරීමක් ඇනලිසිස් එකක් අපි දැක්කද?
තව අවුරුදු 5කින් අපි කොතනදීද?
මම ඒකට උත්තරයක් නොදී ඉන්නම් ගන්න.
බුද්ධිමය ප්‍රවේශයකට මාවත YouTube පිටුව subscribe කරන්න.
Now we have a brain drain. We are competing with other countries. We are competing with other countries. Let's be real.
If we look at the framework of what needs to be done, we need to make it easier for people to stay, harder to leave, and replace talent.
Sri Lanka is basically then loses the possibility of having creative, intelligent, efficient people to run the system.
We can move away with the negative brand that we have as a country that sends women to work.
We need to make it more easier for people to go in and out.
Face the Nation, Wednesday nights at 9:30 on TV1.
Hello there, welcome back. You're watching The People's Platform. We're continuing our discussion with Mr. Fernando from the Joint Apparel Association Forum. We were speaking about a lot of the external factors that have affected Sri Lankan apparel exports. Let's talk a bit about the economic factors, at least the changes in the economic policies here in Sri Lanka. Let's start with the tax. There are many people who complained about the tax. There were those who went on strike against the tax. But the tax is still there, and recently the governor of the central bank said that certain taxes, including the payee tax, they will be able to reduce it by the second half of this year. How has taxes really impacted the apparel sector?
See, most of the factories, coming under the BOI, they had certain tax, not holidays, for every factory the tax holidays were over, but they had some tax agreements, like for example, say, originally when they start up the business, they said, okay, you have 5-year tax holiday, but after 5 years, you are able to enjoy, say, 14% tax for all the export income. So that was more or less the policy tax. You have two tax rates. One is the zero tax during a tax holiday. One is reduced tax for exporters and certain other industries like software developers, exporters, then certain other local manufacturers. Now what happened was, with the recent changes, they eliminated all these exemptions and they made everybody has to pay the same taxes, which is for the corporate tax was lifted up to 28%. And of course, no one wants to pay high taxes, so even the apparel industry wasn't that happy. Okay, but also we understand the situation, country situation, and when we have spoken with the authorities, including the Treasury Secretary, even including the President's level, so explain why the tax rates have to be going up, and maybe they ensure that this will not continue forever, but maybe for a smaller period, probably 1 year, 2 years, maybe they'll review that, once we come out from the struggle. Because, for example, even President has mentioned that we need to build an export economy. As one of the main reasons is why we are in this status. You look at, what is our usual export income? We have been exporting, our export income had been between $10-12 billion per annum. Whereas our import value per year was over 20 billion. So that creates about 8-9 billion deficit every year. But also we were getting some income from tourism. Prior to COVID, we were getting about 4 billion. And also we had the remittances from the foreign, employed people or the migrant workers.
So every year the deficit was about, the real deficit was about 3-4 billion.
Actually, so I believe that maybe with the tourism income and the foreign remittances coming in, so we were able to manage. Okay,
but we were going on the rim.
No, we were not able to really manage. We were able to, the total export and income, import value plus tourism more or less equal. Okay, but what happened was we had to pay debts, local and foreign debts. Where is the money to pay the interest? We have taken a lot of foreign loans for various development activities. So that's where the problem started. We have taken a lot of loans. I'm not saying the loans aren't bad. We need the loans.
There are some bad loans.
Some bad loans, of course, like spending for the white elephants, like Lotus Tower, the airport at Hambantota. So there are several cases, as a country, I don't think that they are really, really white elephants. You don't need those things. But as a country, and we have been from the government income, they have been spending over 70%, I think 70 to 80% to pay the salaries of the government workers. So we had a very fat government workforce. So those inefficiencies plus the lack of export income to the country, that's where the problem started. And so that's where I think when the current president had, even when there was this Yahapalana government, they wanted to make an export strategy. But even that export strategy, apparel was not considered as, they were not focusing much on the apparel industry because they identified as a sunset industry or mature industry or sunset industry. The more focus has gone to the other industries plus software, okay, IT. It's okay, not bad, but the problem is, once it's that, opinion is that they don't give any more encouragement for the industry, even for the apparel. But the COVID was made a difference in here because everyone understood the COVID was, during COVID, the even apparel sector was made as an essential service because we were the more or less main forex revenue for the country during that time and afterwards also. And we have been helping, maybe for the people who aren't aware, we have been helping when the crisis, from the time the crisis started, many times probably, maybe the central bank governor or maybe the government someone, minister, they calls, Jeff, ask, can you help us to release this shipment? So many times we have been helping. Okay, because it was not the best, but it's not our direct responsibility. But we have to understand as a country, we need to do something. So we have been doing this help for the government, but that wasn't the correct step. However, with these taxes, the problem is especially for the foreign investors. Now, my company is a foreign investor. The largest foreign investment from Italy. So they have become very, very not discouraged. How do I say? They think, we are a bunch of liars. We sign an agreement saying something, and middle of something also during when the Yahapalana government came to power, they introduced something called super gain tax. And by that time, we have declared the dividends also. So that's a huge amount. And then again, when during this recent government also, when Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president, surcharge tax. So these I understand, but maybe the country was managed badly. Maybe we don't have resources because I don't think any businesses stole money from the country. Okay, there could be some corrupt businessmen work in hand with the corrupt politicians. I'm not talking, but the majority, they pay correct taxes. They pay correct dues to the government. So why do the business have to pay for that? And especially the foreign investors, they were given, we are asking them, Sri Lanka we have the correct policies, we are promising, we have given them these things, you won't be touched. But then you act differently. So these are some of the reasons why we aren't able to attract investors to Sri Lanka. Because we have to understand, if you look at, including Singapore, many countries, how they are developing. You need the local investments also, but we have the capacity problem. Capacity in the sense, funding. Because we don't have capital. So that's where we need to make foreign investors to see that Sri Lanka is the investment destination. Over the 30 years, we have been able to get probably maximum of about $20 billion to the country as FDIs. That's not good enough. But maybe countries like Vietnam, even Bangladesh, they are bringing, the investments very high.
About 40 billion a year.
Yeah. That's 40 billion is the export value, export revenue, what I mentioned was. But I think Vietnam, sometimes, they are able to get investments over 40 billion per annum also. Countries like Vietnam. But in Sri Lanka, we are struggling. We are struggling even not $1 billion per year. There were a lot of years. We have seen maybe the total FDI was about $600 million. So this is where, and also how efficient, how effective the BOI. No blame to BOI, the Board of Investments. When we open up the market, when we open up the export trade, when BOI was established first, that was meant to be a one-stop shop. All the investor requirements, they were supposed to provide, including the tax issues.
But does that happen?
Now it's no longer is a one-stop shop. BOI, I think their wings were cut, so they are not able to fly. So maybe for the land acquisition or land matters, you have to wait something. I'll tell my example. Previous government, after the war was over, the previous president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, invited all the leading companies to make some investments in the north. Not a bad idea, because we also consider it as a social responsibility to open our factory there so that we are able to provide some jobs for the people in the north. So I know how difficult for us to set up the operations there, because somebody is helping, somebody is pulling from the leg. Okay. Then again, more or less the lease agreement. After running the factory, after we have started operations in 2013, only in 2020 or 21, I was able to get the lease agreement signed. So that means that, these things we were not able to share with the foreign investor, because they say they'll start, they will get fainted, because how can, because we have invested so much of money on a land where we don't have the right. Okay, they have given some sort of a basic agreement or whatever. It's not the main lease agreement. So people are passing the ball to here and there. So this is where I think people need to really, the government plus the government authorities. I don't want to always tell the government. Government is not only politicians, but also the bureaucrats, whatever the ministry secretaries, the other people who are working there, and they need to have a passion about the development of a country. It's not just the money that they get as a salary or maybe as what is getting under the table.
So one final question, because we're nearing the end of the program, the time allotted for this show. Mr. Fernando, now let's look at the current times. We see a lot of mistakes of the past being repeated here in Sri Lanka. Now, you spoke of the ease of doing business index, but also the law and order situation in the country, the safety or the feeling of safety for investors to come into Sri Lanka is also important. We see once again mistakes of the past, mistakes that maybe led to the 30-year war, and mistakes that led to disparities among communities surfacing again right now as we speak. There are groups who are working to create hatred amongst communities for various reasons, including maybe some political mileage. So how far do you think such acts would take us back at a time when we're already 2 steps behind the world?
I mean, it's a big issue, very big issue. I mean, we can't consider as a minor issue because few things can happen. We are really getting a lot of help by the GSP Plus agreement. And when you have the GSP Plus agreement with EU, now GSP Plus agreement is supposed to expire by end of the year, but we are able to operate under the same agreement until end of 2025. Okay. Now EU, they are laid down a lot of compliances. And maybe even the PTA, that's why they have removed the PTA, but now they have bringing this anti-terrorism law, and EU doesn't like certain clauses in that. So this kind of creation of hatred among what do you call ethnic groups or the religions groups, where will that be end? You know, we know some years back there was this really in early 2010, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, this period, you know, it was not easy. And these people, the world is so small. The news, sometimes, you know, it goes to other countries even before we know something is this nature is happening. So a lot of people now, it's the consumer rights, human aspect, the sustainability issues, all this part are because they don't want to buy certain goods. Customers, maybe when it's made in a country where they don't respect the basic human rights. You understood what I'm saying? Yeah. So that will basically lead us to a bigger problem. We may be cornered by the world, put into a corner by the world, where because this is very visible, these kind of things become visible. No. First thing is the EU thing. They will definitely say no. You have the basically you don't respect all the nationalities, all the religions group the same. You will be having issues. Maybe they will say discontinue the GSP Plus. That's one thing. But also, like you know now, also one of the issue currently we are facing is that a lot of consumer groups are there. They want us to use the sustainable materials, no carbon emission. Okay, then also no child labor. This child labor issue has been there for a long time, but pay decent wages. All these things. So, but on top of that, you know, if this comes, definitely they are going to say no, because there will be pressure to the brands, bigger brands. Okay. Oh, these people, the brands, let's say Victoria's Secret or our own brand or Nike, the consumers will say they will boycott, not buy. So they get the pressure from the consumers. So don't source from Sri Lanka, a country where they don't treat everybody the same. So then we can jump and say, you know, like, okay, Sri Lanka, we are the best nation in the world, you know, and we can just happily say close the island. And that's what's going to happen. I hope, I pray. I mean, the people, the leaders will not lead this country back to that situation again. We have a bigger responsibility, all of us have a bigger responsibility that such acts, not to make sure that such acts won't be repeated.
Well, and definitely it's I think there's a very popular saying that goes, fool me once, shame on me, I beg your pardon, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So let's not get fooled by these distractions as they may be from the real problem, which is the economy of Sri Lanka and the sustainability as a country, all of us. How far can we live together and how far can we develop as a nation? Thank you very much, Mr. Fernando, for joining us on our program. Thank you very much for all our viewers out there for tuning in. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Thank you.